Okay, so in this video we're just going to talk about the very basics of how to get started in Blender. So once we've got our Blender open, we can just go ahead and click General on this splash screen, and we're greeted with this very useful scene. So we start off with just this default cube. We have a camera and we have a light. In this case we don't need the camera or the light, so I'm just going to go ahead and select those and press delete. So one thing I will do while I'm at it is just start my shortcut keys. So if you look down here, you'll see exactly what I'm pressing. So if I left click, right click, you'll see exactly what I'm doing down here. Just in case it's difficult to follow along with what I'm doing. So hopefully that's helpful. So the first thing you probably need to learn is, how to navigate in this viewport, how to, move around in this world. So left click generally selects things. Right click brings up context menus based on whatever selection you have. And the way we move around in the scene is by holding the Alt key and some combination of our 3 mouse buttons. So if we hold Alt and left click, we're going to orbit around. If we middle click, Alt and middle click, we're going to track along whatever we're looking at. And if we hold Alt and right click, we're going to zoom in and out. Great. So, just me playing around here. So this is something you should get used to as quickly as you can, because you're going to be spending a lot of time holding the Alt key and, playing around with the mouse buttons. So from here, you really need to know about the different object modes. So in Blender we have the idea of an object mode, which is kind of like we're selecting a whole object, and we have the idea of an edit mode. And there's a few different modes within this edit mode umbrella. To get a better idea of what these are, let's just take a look at them. So if we hit the edit key, which is tab, we'll get this radial menu. So what we'll see here is a bunch of different options. We're going to have edit, vertex, face, and edge. So if we were to select one of these, it's going to correlate to our ability to select that type of that part of the object. So in a lot of cases we're going to want face, so in this case let's just click face, and you notice that everything gets selected in our object, even the back sides. If I left click anywhere, it will deselect, and if I want to select parts of this again, so faces, I just left click, and I can hold shift, left click, and select multiple faces. Do take note that we don't select the faces on the back side. The way we would do that is by going back into our tab menu and clicking occlude, and instantly you'll notice that we can now see these edges on the back side. So if we start left click, shift clicking, we can actually get the objects in the back. And we can also left click and drag and select all the faces that we happen to land over. Great, so let's go back to object mode. And let's take a look at the other two modes. So let's look at edge. So edge, as you might have guessed, is the ability to select the different edges. And vertex is the ability to select individual points that make up these edges and faces. Great. So now that we know how to select parts of our object, let's talk about the way we translate and move these things. So there's 3 different ways to transform our selection, and they're going to be right here. We can see move, rotate, and scale, and they do correlate to some speed keys. So W, E, and R. So I recommend getting used to using these speed keys. It'll make your life a lot faster and easier. So let's go back to face. I'm going to select this top face, and I'm going to get rid of occlusion. So I'm going to go back to what's called pass-through. And now that I have that selection, if I press the W key, this gets selected, and we get this little transform handle. So this is our move handles, and each one of these handles correlate to one of the axes in the world. So X, Y, and Z in this case. So if I click, let's say the Z one here, the blue one, left click and drag, we can see how I can just edit that. Okay, and the same goes for the other two as well. So if I press E now, we can go to our rotate and we get these 3 circle handles. And again, they relate to different axes within the world. So if I start selecting one of those, we can see how we can edit them. And now's probably a good chance to mention the undo. So Control Z. Control Z is your friend. Use it whenever you have to. In this case, I didn't want that, so I undid it. So let's have a look at scale, which is the R key. And again, we have these 3 different handles that relate to the different axes. If I was to select this green one, for example, we start to scale out in the Y. Again, scale out in X. And a great thing to keep in mind with any of these, if we just have a selection and change to one of these tools, we can just middle click and drag, and it will drag uniformly. So in this case, it's as if we're selecting this handle in the middle. So let's now take a look at some of the operations we can do to some of these selections of our mesh. So in this case, let's have a play with extrude. So with this face selected, I'm just going to hit this extrude region and then just drag up. So notice that when I start that operation, it's now selected the same face that we would have expected, except we have this loop of faces now between what we had selected and where it was before. So with that in mind, I can go back to my scale tool, middle mouse click and drag in, and I can get this very nice shape already. So another thing that's usually really useful when editing your objects is this loop cut. So if I select that and hover over it, you'll notice that we get this preview of where our loop will go, and that can be really, really useful before you commit to an action. So I'm going to select one. I'll put one right here in the middle, and notice it already selected it. I'm going to go to my scale tool and just bring it out, and I can do that a few times if I want to make a nice curved edge. Again, very nice. Now let's go to object mode and take a look. Great. So you might be wondering, okay, so we start with a cube. How do I get more cubes, or a cylinder, or a torus, or anything for that matter? So in object mode, go to add, mesh, and we get a bunch of different options for us. Because we already played with a cube, let's take a look at a cylinder. So our cylinder gets created at this origin, right? So this origin is this kind of like life preserver colored circle here, and that can be moved. Generally, it's at the origin of the world, so it's wherever the X, Y, and Z connect at 0, and that's usually the best place to have it, otherwise it gets confusing. So notice that this object gets created at the origin, and the origin is this kind of red and white life preserver looking object here. And in this case, it's actually sitting inside of our previous object, which we don't want at this case. But before we move this or do any other operation such as a move or a scale or a rotate, notice that at the bottom here we have this add cylinder. If we click that, we get a bunch of different options, and this will let us edit the way that primitive looks. So we can edit how many vertices are used to make up that particular primitive. In this case, it's going to be the edges that run down the object from the caps. So that's how many of those are going to be used to define the shape. The radius and the depth simply change width and height. So let's have a look at what they do. So I'm just going to slide along a radius by left clicking and dragging, and let's do depth. So yeah, awesome. So let's put this at the top of our object. So I'm fairly happy with that. So this is going to be kind of our prize on top of the pedestal. One thing to also keep in mind, if you want to focus on an object again, so let's say you want to look exactly at where it is, you can just hit the F key and it will just zoom into that object you have selected. And it will zoom into multiple objects if you have those selected. It will just kind of average the center point of those two things. This can be really, really useful if you find yourself you know, way off here, for example, and you want to orbit around here. If I start orbiting, you know, that isn't at my center. That's not very useful to me. But if I have this selected, hit F, it's now my center. So it's where the camera is looking. Lastly, let's have a quick look at the outliner. The outliner is this this collection of things at the top right here. The outliner, you know, kind of houses all the objects that are within our scene, and that can be like meshes or cameras or lights or pretty much anything really. This is really useful because it lets us, you know, arrange our objects into logical groups. It lets us name our varying objects, which can be really, really useful if we want to identify, if we have a lot of stuff in our scene, for example, and we want to find the smallest little bolt or something in there. We could name it bolt, you know, southwest, east quarter, blah, 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 whatever. Right, something useful to us. In this case, I'm going to change cube to base. And I'm going to change cylinder to treasure, because it's the treasure on top. And yeah, so that makes it a lot easier later. If I'm trying to find, you know, the treasure within my scene or something, I can just click this and hit F, and there I am. So, you know, it'd be useful if, for example, I create something and it's hidden within something else, and I know, oh, it's my treasure. I'm going to find it, and I'm going to go, oh, there it is. I immediately know exactly where it is, and I can put it back in its rightful place. Great. So I think we'll leave it there. We will strive to learn a lot more as we go. So in the next video, we're really just going to look at, you know, creating an object from scratch and, you know, learning, you know, as we go, all the more finer details of all of this. Okay, thanks.